The alien species known as the Carithians had always been a peaceful race, one that valued knowledge, trade, and diplomacy over war. For centuries, they had thrived in their corner of the galaxy, creating beautiful cities on their lush, green planet. But all of that changed when the Darkai, a ruthless and war-hungry species, appeared on the edge of their system. The Darkai had no interest in diplomacy or peace. They only desired power and destruction. The Carithians had fought back, as best as they could, but the Darkai were too strong. Their ships were fast, their weapons devastating, and their armies nearly unstoppable. In the span of only a few months, the Darkai wiped out entire colonies, leaving the Carithians with no choice but to flee to their capital city, Reuven, and hope for rescue. The Carithians sent out an emergency distress signal, hoping that anyone in the galaxy might hear it and come to their aid. The message was broadcast across every frequency, every channel, hoping to catch the attention of nearby civilizations. "We are the Carithians of Reuven. We are under attack. Please, anyone who can help, come to our aid. The Darkai are destroying us. Our people are dying." For days, the message went unanswered. The Carithians tried to keep their hope alive, but as time passed, the silence grew deafening. They watched as their cities burned and their people fell to the invaders. The Darkai were relentless, and the Carithians knew they couldn't hold out much longer. In a final act of desperation, the Carithian leaders decided to send the message to every corner of the galaxy, hoping that someone, somewhere, would hear it and come to their aid. It was a long shot, but they had no other choice. As the message was transmitted into the void of space, no one replied. No other species came forward. No allies answered the call. The Carithians began to lose all hope. They feared their extinction was inevitable. But far from where the Carithians resided, a different group of beings were listening. The Deathworlders, the humans. The humans were known across the galaxy for their brutal reputation. They came from a planet called Earth, a world that was nothing like the peaceful Carithians' home. Earth was a death world, a place where every living thing fought for survival. The humans had survived their own harsh conditions, learning to adapt and fight back against the many dangers that lurked on their planet. Humans had been isolated from most of the galactic community for a long time, with few alien species willing to even interact with them. But word of their strength and terrifying ability to fight had spread over time. They were feared by many and respected by even more. The Carithian distress signal reached the humans in an unexpected way. They had long since stopped paying attention to the pleas of weaker species, who would often ask for help out of desperation. There was something about the Carithian message that caught their attention. Perhaps it was the raw emotion in the plea, or perhaps it was the idea that they might finally find an opportunity to prove their strength on a grand stage. Whatever the reason, the humans made their decision. They would respond. The decision to answer the call was made not by a council or a leader, but by the men and women who lived in the harshest conditions on Earth, the Deathworlders. Captain Rachel Lewis, a battle-hardened veteran of Earth's military forces, sat at the helm of the flagship Vanguard, a massive warship that was known for its unmatched firepower and impenetrable defenses. She had been through many battles, but she had never faced anything like the Darkai before. When the message came through, she knew it was no ordinary call for help. The Carithians had no idea what they were asking for. Rachel had heard the stories. The Darkai were known to be vicious, but they were not the true enemy of the humans. The humans had faced far worse than the Darkai, and had always emerged victorious. To the Deathworlders, a challenge like this was nothing but another opportunity to prove their worth. "Captain, the fleet is ready for departure," a voice called from behind her. It was Lieutenant James Foster, her second in command. He was as battle-tested as she was, and they both understood that this mission would be unlike any they had faced before. "Good," Captain Lewis replied. "Prepare the Vanguard for immediate jump. We're going to answer their call." Crew of the Vanguard worked swiftly to make sure everything was in order. As the ship powered up, Rachel looked out the viewport. She could see Earth's great cities, glowing in the distance, unaware of the immense power that was about to leave their world. They were not ready for the Deathworlders' response, but the humans were always ready. Meanwhile, back on Reuven, the Corinthians were preparing for their last stand. They had no idea that help was on the way, nor could they imagine that the help they were about to receive would come from the most feared species in the galaxy. They were simply too broken to believe it. The Dark Eye, however, were not so unaware. As the human ships began their journey, the Dark Eye watched the empty void. Wondering who would come next to challenge their dominance, they had no idea what was about to happen, but they would soon learn that underestimating the Deathworlders was a fatal mistake. As the Vanguard and its fleet of human warships tore through space, heading for the Corinthian homeworld, Rachel knew one thing for sure: this was no ordinary rescue mission. It was a reckoning. This part sets the stage for the dramatic response of the humans, introducing both the desperation of the Corinthians and the calm, calculated readiness of the Deathworlders. If you need any further refinements or additions, feel free to ask. Chat. The vast expanse of space was quiet as the fleet of human warships traveled through the void toward the Corinthian homeworld. Captain Rachel Lewis stood at the helm of the Vanguard, watching the distant stars stretch into streaks as their ships moved faster than the speed of light. Behind her, the crew was focused, their every movement precise. Trained through years of battles and survival on their harsh homeworld, we're almost there. Captain Lieutenant James Foster reported, his voice steady as he glanced at the star maps on his console. "Good," Rachel replied, her eyes narrowing. "Let's make sure we're ready. No mistakes." She knew this mission was unlike any they had ever faced before. The Corinthians were a peaceful race, a species that had never fought a war of this magnitude. They were fighting for their survival, and that desperation had drawn the attention of the humans. The Deathworlders were not here to merely help. They were here to fight, to destroy the enemies that threatened those who had called for their aid. As the fleet continued its journey through the stars, Rachel couldn't help but think of Earth, a death world where every day was a struggle. A place where people fought not just for survival, but for strength, for honor, and for the will to protect their own. The Dark Eye had no idea what kind of force they were about to face. On the Corinthian homeworld, life was still carrying on as best as it could under the shadow of the Dark Eye's attack. In the capital city of Reuven, people were huddled together, trying to protect themselves from the constant bombardment. Buildings were falling, fires burned in the streets, and families were torn apart as the Dark Eye showed no mercy. The Corinthian leaders, once proud diplomats and peaceful rulers, now stood in ruins. They had no idea that help was on the way. No one had responded to their distress signal. No one had come to offer them aid. They feared the worst, that their race was doomed. But then, something incredible happened. The skies above Reuven began to change. There was a ripple in the air, a strange, unnatural sound as the fabric of space itself seemed to stretch and twist. For a brief moment, the Corinthians thought they were imagining it. But the sound grew louder, and soon they saw it. A fleet of warships appeared in the sky, each one larger and more imposing than anything they had ever seen. The ships weren't like the sleek, elegant vessels of the Corinthian people. They were massive, heavy, and covered in armor that looked like it had been forged from the harshest environments in the galaxy. At the forefront of the fleet was the Vanguard, its dark silhouette cutting through the clouds of smoke that lingered over the city. The humans had arrived. The Corinthians stood in stunned silence as the ships descended, their massive frames dwarfing anything they had ever built. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, a flicker of hope stirred in their hearts. Was this really the help they had asked for? Could the humans really save them? As the human ships landed, the Corinthians waited in awe, not knowing what to expect. They had heard of the Deathworlders. Of course, every race in the galaxy had. The humans were a myth, a legend, a species feared by many and respected by even more. They had a reputation for surviving the harshest conditions, for conquering impossible odds. But what did that mean for the Corinthians? Would they even recognize the humans as saviors, or would they simply see them as another force of destruction? Rachel Lewis stepped off the Vanguard, her boots hitting the ground with a heavy thud. She was followed by her officers and crew, all wearing the same uniform of battle-hardened soldiers. Their faces were grim, their expressions focused. They were here to fight, to do what was necessary to ensure that the Corinthian race would survive. Captain Lewis, a Corinthian leader, Ambassador Tan, approached her, his voice shaking. He had once been a proud figure, a symbol of peace and hope for his people. Now, he was a man on the edge of despair, his world falling apart. You're here. Rachel nodded, her eyes scanning the city around her. We're here. We're not leaving until the Dark Eye are gone. Tan could hardly believe it. The humans were here to help, to fight for them. The Corinthians had expected something small, a token gesture of aid from a distant species. But this, this was different. The humans had come with an army, and their ships, their weapons, their presence. It was clear they weren't here to play games. Thank you, Captain, Tan said, his voice filled with emotion. We didn't think anyone would come. We thought we were finished. We never leave our allies behind, Rachel replied, her voice cold with resolve. We fight for survival, and we fight for those who can't defend themselves. The Dark Eye are going to learn that the hard way. As the human soldiers began to set up their defenses and prepare for battle, the Corinthians watched in awe. They had never seen anything like it. The humans didn't just show up. They acted with purpose. They worked quickly and efficiently, preparing their weapons and ships for the coming fight. It was clear that they were ready for war, no matter what it took. Back on the Dark Eye warships, their leaders watched through their sensors, stunned by what they saw. The humans had arrived, and they were not afraid. The Dark Eye had underestimated the Deathworlders. They thought they could easily crush the Corinthians and any would-be rescuers, but now it was clear they had made a grave mistake. The first wave of Dark Eye ships began their descent toward Reuven. They were not prepared for the counterattack that was coming. The humans had arrived to show them exactly what it meant to face the fury of a Deathworlder. This part continues the build-up to the arrival of the humans and their impressive display of strength and preparedness. The Corinthians start to realize the true power of their rescuers, setting the stage for the upcoming battle with the Dark Eye. Let me know if you would like any adjustments or additional. The Corinthian people watched in awe as the human fleet positioned itself in orbit above their planet. The massive warships, each brimming with firepower, seemed to hover like silent giants in the sky. On the surface of Reuven, a calm before the storm settled over the Corinthian capital city. The devastation from the Dark Eye had not ceased, and yet, for the first time in days, there was a glimmer of hope. The Dark Eye, unaware of the true force they were about to face, began to prepare their own attack. They had no fear of the Corinthians, nor did they understand the significance of the human arrival. They had expected an easy victory, a final blow to crush the last resistance. But the appearance of the human fleet was a challenge they had never prepared for. On the Dark Eye flagship, Commander Rorak looked through the viewfinder of his command station. Eyes narrowed in confusion. The human ships were unlike anything he had seen before. Their weapons were powerful, but it wasn't just their firepower that worried him. It was their presence. It was as if the human ships carried a weight that made even the Dark Eye pause. Are they really willing to fight for these weaklings? Rorak growled, his deep voice filled with disbelief. Do they think they can stop us? His second-in-command, Vreek, stood by his side. It seems they do, Commander. Their ships are positioning themselves around the Corinthian capital. They're ready for combat. Let them come, Rorak spat. We'll crush them, just like we did to their kind before. These Deathworlders won't be a problem. It was wrong. No one knew the full extent of what the humans could do, and they were about to find out. Back on Reuven, Captain Rachel Lewis stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, watching as the Dark Eye fleet began to make its move. The quiet hum of the ship's systems was the only sound, but Rachel could feel the tension in the air. The time for words was over. Now it was time for action. Lieutenant Foster, Rachel said, her voice calm but firm. Ready all weapons. I want a full defensive perimeter set up around the city. Make sure our shields are at full strength. We can't afford any mistakes. Understood, Captain, Foster replied, his fingers moving quickly across the console. Rachel could see that the Carithian leaders had gathered on the command deck of the Vanguard, watching everything unfold. Tan, the ambassador, stood by her side, his eyes wide with nervous energy. Captain, Tan began, his voice hesitant. We have never faced an enemy like the Dark Eye. They are relentless, and their numbers are overwhelming. I fear your fleet is not enough. Rachel turned to him, her gaze unwavering. We're not here to fight for numbers. We're here to win. Tan swallowed hard. The human confidence was something he wasn't used to, but it was also something he desperately needed. His people had been on the brink of defeat for so long, and now, here were the humans ready to fight not for victory, but for survival. In the distance, the Dark Eye fleet began to advance. The ships were sleek and menacing, designed for speed and power. They were formidable opponents, but they were not prepared for the humans' approach. The first volley of fire came from the Dark Eye fleet, striking the human shields with a resounding crash. But the shields held firm, and the Vanguard remained. Unscathed, the human warships didn't flinch. They'd been designed for this, for battle, for pain. On the Dark Eye flagship, Rorak's eyes widened as he watched the humans absorb his attack without a scratch. What is this? He demanded. Their shields should have been destroyed. Shields at full power, Commander, his second-in-command confirmed. They are far stronger than we anticipated. Then we'll just have to hit harder, Rorak said, his voice seething with anger. We'll break them. We'll break. All of them. As the Dark Eye prepared for another strike, Rachel issued her own orders. All ships lock on target and return fire. Target their lead ships first. Take out their command structure. The Vanguard fired its first volley, the powerful plasma bolts racing through space toward the Dark Eye fleet. The human ships had never been known for their speed, but their firepower more than made up for it.
Ow.
One by one, the Dark Eye ships began to take hits. Explosions rang out across the fleet, and the Carithian people, watching from the surface, felt a surge of hope. For the first time they saw the tables turn. The human fleet was relentless. Every shot was calculated, every move deliberate. The Dark Eye began to realize that they had underestimated the humans. They had been prepared for a fight against a weaker species, one that would crumble under their force. But they were facing something far different now. Rachel's voice rang through the comms as she directed her fleet's attack. Don't let up. Every ship counts. We end this now. The human warships shifted their formations, creating a defensive grid around Reuven, ensuring that the Corthians were protected as much as possible. The Dark Eye were no longer just fighting for conquests, they were fighting for their survival. The humans had arrived, and they were not going to let anyone stand in their way. As the battle raged on, the Carithians began to realize the truth. The humans were not just here to fight, they were here to win. And in doing so, they had given the Carithians something they had not had in weeks. Hope. In the distance, the Dark Eye flagship continued to fire, but it was now clear that the battle was slipping away from them. The humans had turned the tide, and soon they would learn that their warships, however powerful, could not withstand the fury of a Deathworlder. Rorak snarled in fury as he watched his forces falter. Retreat, all ships retreat, he ordered, but it was too late. Humans had already taken control. Rachel stood tall on the bridge, watching as the enemy retreated. The first battle was won, but it was only the beginning. The Dark Eye had been sent a message. Never underestimate the Deathworlders. This part focuses on the rising tension as the humans engage in their first major battle against the Dark Eye, showing the contrast between the human strength and the Darkai's arrogance. The Carithians witness firsthand the deadly power of their new allies. Let me know if you'd like any further changes or additions, asked Ch. The battle above Reuven had escalated quickly, and now the real test had begun. The Dark Eye fleet, battered and disoriented from the human attack, was regrouping. The once confident invaders were now fighting to hold on to their territory, their ships drifting in space like wounded beasts. On the bridge of the Vanguard, Captain Rachel Lewis stood with a focused expression. Her hands moved swiftly across the command console, giving orders to her crew without hesitation. Behind her, the Carithian leaders, including Ambassador Tan, were observing everything with wide eyes, the sight of the humans' precision there. Ability to fight under pressure was unlike anything they had ever seen. "Captain," Lieutenant Foster called, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "The Dark-Eye are regrouping. They're sending in reinforcements." Rachel's eyes narrowed. "Let them come. We've already shown them they can't win. Now we finish this." The Carithians, for the first time in what felt like forever, felt something that resembled confidence. They had been used to being the prey, always running, always hiding. But now, with the humans by their side, they were beginning to see what it meant to be the hunter. On the Dark-Eye flagship, Commander Rorak's fist slammed down on the console in frustration. "What are we dealing with here?" he growled. "These humans should be no match for us. We've conquered worlds far more powerful." Vreek, his second-in-command, looked at him with a mix of anger and disbelief. "They're unlike anything we've faced. Their tactics, their weapons, they don't fight like any other species. They fight like animals." Rorak's eyes flashed with hatred. "Fine. Then we'll show them what happens when you fight the Dark-Eye. All ships, focus fire on the vanguard." The Dark-Eye fleet began to move in unison, their ships aligning. For a massive assault, they were hoping to overwhelm the human warship, to take it down before the humans could react. Their first strike hit hard. The barrage of plasma fire and missiles tearing through space toward the human fleet. But Rachel had anticipated this. The vanguard shields flared with light, absorbing the enemy fire, while the other human ships moved into position, returning fire with a fury that shook the heavens. Every human warship opened up with everything they had. Plasma beams, kinetic missiles, and energy blasts streaked through the stars, slamming into the Dark-Eye ships. The Carithians, who had been watching from their own city, saw the skies above them light up with explosions. The air was filled with the rumble of battle, but it was no longer the sound of their destruction. It was the sound of their salvation, the humans. "Their incredible ambassador," Tan said, his voice filled with awe. "I never imagined anything like this." Rachel's voice came over the comms, calm but full of purpose. "Stay focused, everyone. We need to clear the skies, protect the Carithians, and finish this." The humans moved as one, their ships in perfect coordination. It was as if the crew had become a single entity, thinking and acting together in complete harmony. The Dark-Eye ships, despite their strength, began to falter under the relentless assault. The humans weren't just fighting, they were hunting, moving with a precision that left no room for error. On the battlefield, the Dark-Eye started to panic. Ships that had once been considered invincible were now breaking apart, their hulls scorched and dented from the human weapons. Rorak's eyes burned with fury as his fleet started to crumble. "This isn't over," Rorak roared, slamming his fist against the console. "All ships retreat to the secondary position. We need to regroup. We'll crush them later." The humans were not interested in giving the Dark-Eye a second chance. The Vanguard's weapons continued to unleash destruction, targeting the Dark-Eye's command ships. One by one, the invaders' ships were disabled, their once proud fleet now in disarray. Rachel stood tall on the bridge, watching the battle unfold. "We've got them on the ropes. Keep pushing forward," she ordered. Her voice was steady, but the glint in her eyes showed the battle was far from over. The Carithians couldn't believe what they were witnessing. They had expected a brief fight, a momentary defense before their inevitable destruction. But now, they saw the human fleet dismantling the Dark-Eye war machine piece by piece. It was a sight they would never forget. "They're not just fighting for us," Tan said, a look of disbelief in his eyes. "They're fighting for the galaxy. For all of us." As the battle continued, the Dark-Eye began to realize the extent of their mistake. They had underestimated the humans in every way. It thought their superior technology, their advanced weapons, and their sheer numbers would win the day. But they were wrong. The humans fought with a skill and determination that no one else could match. In the midst of the chaos, a new challenge arose. A Dark-Eye warship, heavily damaged but still operational, managed to break through the human defenses. It was heading directly for the Carithian capital, aiming to deliver a final deadly strike. The Carithians panicked, thinking their city would be reduced to rubble once again. "Captain," Lieutenant Foster shouted, his voice rising in alarm. "There's a Dark-Eye warship heading straight for the city. We can't let it get through." Rachel's expression hardened as she turned to face the crew. "We won't let that happen. All ships engage the warship. We're stopping it now." With a series of coordinated maneuvers, the human fleet surged forward, positioning itself between the Dark-Eye warship and Reuven. The battle was now reaching its peak, and the humans were determined to end it once and for all. The Vanguard and the other human ships focused all of their firepower on the Dark-Eye ship. It took everything they had, but finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the Dark-Eye vessel exploded in a brilliant flash of light.
Ow.
The Carithian capital was saved. The humans had done it. They had not only stopped the Dark-Eye invasion, but they had also given the Carithians a new chance at life. As the final remnants of the Dark-Eye fleet retreated into the darkness, Rachel stood on the bridge, her gaze steady as the battle ended. "Good work, everyone. We've won today, but the war is far from over." For the Carithians, the fight was just beginning, but now they had the strength to face whatever came next, and they would face it alongside the humans. Their new allies, the Deathworlders, who had turned the tide of the war. This part highlights the human fleet's victory in their first major clash with the Dark-Eye, and showcases the teamwork and tactics that make them so formidable. The Carithians start to realize that they are not just being saved, they are becoming part of something much larger. Let me know if you need any adjustments or further. The sky over Reuven was quiet now, no longer filled with the sound of explosions or the flashing lights of battle. The human fleet had successfully pushed back the Dark-Eye forces, and the remaining invaders were retreating. In days, the Carithian people allowed themselves to breathe, to hope. Their city had survived, and so had they. The threat was not over, but the first victory had been theirs. Captain Rachel Lewis stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, watching the stars in the distance. The battle had been brutal, but it was only the beginning. She knew the Dark-Eye would not give up easily if they would return, stronger and more determined than ever. But now, the humans had a foothold, and that made all the difference. "Captain, the fleet has successfully secured the area," Lieutenant Foster reported, his voice calm but filled with relief. "The Dark-Eye are retreating, but they're not gone yet. They're regrouping in the outer system." Rachel nodded, her face hardening. "We expected as much. They won't let this defeat stand. Prepare for the next phase. We're not done yet." On the surface of Reuven, the Carithian leaders were meeting with the human commanders. Ambassador Tan, his eyes still wide with disbelief, stood beside Rachel as they discussed the next steps. "You've done more than we ever expected," Tan said, his voice filled with gratitude. "You've saved us, but what now?" "The Dark-Eye will come back. It will not be easily defeated." Rachel met his gaze. "We know. But now you have something you didn't have before, a fighting chance. You have us, and we'll help. You fight them off, for as long as it takes." Tan hesitated, glancing around at the ruins of his once proud city. "I don't understand. Why did you come for us? Why did you risk everything for a species you've never met?" Rachel looked out the viewport, her thoughts drifting for a moment before she spoke.
Right.
We didn't come here to save you, Tan. We came because you asked for help. And when you ask the humans for help, we don't leave. We fight. It's who we are. The Corythians had always been a peaceful species, focused on knowledge and diplomacy, never preparing for war. The humans, on the other hand, were born in the crucible of battle. They had faced dangers on their own planet that no one could imagine and had survived against all odds. They understood what it meant to fight for survival, and they understood that some battles were worth fighting, no matter the cost. As the humans and Corythians continued their discussions, the Dark Eye regrouped in the outer reaches of the system. Their ships had retreated, but their defeat weighed heavily on them. Commander Rorek paced angrily on his flagship, the Dreadfire, watching as his forces rebuilt their strength. They won't get away with this, Rorek growled. The humans are nothing but a nuisance. We will crush them. We'll destroy everything they've built, just as we always do. Freak, his second-in-command, stood beside him. We underestimated them, Commander. The humans fought with a strength and unity we've never seen before, but we still outnumber them. We still have the power to defeat them. Rorak's eyes narrowed. We will destroy them, but we will not attack blindly. We will gather our forces, study their tactics, and strike when the time is right. They may have won a battle, but this war is far from over.
Back on Reuven?
Rachel and Tan were making plans of their own. The Corythians had already begun rebuilding their city, but they knew the real work had only just begun. The humans had given them a second chance, but they couldn't rest on their laurels. They had to be ready for the next assault, and they needed to work together if they had any hope of winning this war. We'll need to fortify the city, Rachel said, her voice steady. We'll also need to train your forces. You've got the numbers, but you don't have the experience. We can help with that. Tan nodded slowly. Yes, we've been peaceful for so long. We've forgotten what it means to fight, but we will learn. For our people, for our survival, the humans. Quickly began working with the Corythian soldiers, teaching them how to fight, how to strategize, and how to defend their world. The Corythians had never been warriors, but they were quick learners. Under the tutelage of the humans, they began to understand what it took to survive in a galaxy filled with threats. It wasn't just about weapons and strength. It was about resolve, about never giving up, no matter the odds. As the days passed, the human fleet remained in orbit, protecting the Corythians as they rebuilt. The Corythians, in turn, grew stronger, learning new tactics and improving their defenses. Humans had given them the tools they needed to fight, but it was up to the Corythians to use them wisely. In the distance, the Dark Eye fleet continued to gather, waiting for the right moment to strike again. They had learned from their defeat, but they had also underestimated their enemies. The humans were not like the other races they had conquered. They were a force to be reckoned with, and they had no intention of backing down. Rachel stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, looking out at the stars. The war was far from over, but for the first time, she felt like they had a chance. They weren't fighting alone anymore. Corythians were with them, and together, they could take on whatever the Dark Eye threw at them. We've got a lot of work ahead of us, Rachel said quietly to herself, but we'll get it done. We always do. The humans had made their mark on this war, but the real test was still to come. The Dark Eye would return, and the fight would be harder than ever. But Rachel and her crew were ready. The tide had turned, and now the humans were here to stay ready to fight. To win, and to ensure that the Corythians would never have to plead for help again. This part shows the transition from survival to preparation. With both the humans and the Corythians strengthening their alliance for the battles ahead, the humans' influence on the Corythians grows, and the Dark Eye, despite their initial retreat, are already planning their next move. Let me know if you'd like further adjustments or additions. Ask chat. The war had come to a crucial moment. The Corythian capital was no longer just a symbol of hope. It had become a fortress. The once peaceful city was now fortified with human technology, designed to withstand any assault. The Corythians had trained, learned, and prepared for the inevitable return of the Dark Captain. Rachel Lewis stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, watching the movements of the enemy fleet. The Dark Eye were on their way back. They had been regrouping, building up their strength, and now they were coming in full force, hoping to finish what they had started. The humans had no illusions this would be the hardest battle yet. "Captain, the Dark Eye are almost in range," Lieutenant Foster reported, his voice steady as usual. "Their fleet is larger than before. They must have spent the last few weeks rebuilding." Rachel's eyes remained focused on the view screen. The Dark Eye fleet was vast, more ships than she had ever seen, but the humans were not afraid. They had faced worse and emerged victorious. Now they had the Corethians on their side, and they would fight to the end to ensure that no one would threaten the peace they had just started to build. "Prepare all ships for engagement," Rachel ordered. "Let's make sure the Dark Eye know what happens when they try to invade human space. All hands, brace for combat." The Corethians, though more prepared now than ever, still felt the weight of the situation. They had never fought a war like this. Their world had been peaceful for so long, and now everything they had worked for was on the line. But with the humans standing beside them, they had something they had never had before: hope. Ambassador Tan stood with Rachel on the bridge, his eyes reflecting the same determination. "I never imagined we'd be here," he said quietly. "I never imagined we'd have to fight a war. But with your help, we'll do whatever it takes to protect our world." Rachel gave him a solemn nod. "We'll fight together. We'll win this together." The two fleets began to close the distance, their weapons ready to unleash. The Dark Eye ships were now in range, and Rachel wasted no time. She ordered the first strike, and the Vanguard's weapons fired with deadly precision. The initial volley of plasma and kinetic fire hit the Dark Eye ships, causing massive explosions and ripples of light across space. The Dark Eye responded almost immediately, their ships retaliating with equal force. It was a brutal exchange, one that sent shockwaves across the battlefield. The humans and the Corethians fought side by side, their ships moving in perfect sync. For the first time in the war, the Corethians were no longer just watching from the sidelines. They were fighting in the charge alongside the humans. On the ground, Corethian soldiers, now trained and equipped by the humans, took up positions. In defense of their cities, the Dark Eye forces had attempted to land troops, but they were met with the combined strength of both human and Corethian forces. The humans taught the Corethians how to fight as one unit, how to think strategically, and react quickly. Now they were showing their worth in the field. The battle in space was fierce, but the humans and Corethians held their ground. The Dark Eye had underestimated the combined force of their enemies. They were used to overwhelming weaker species, but this was different. The humans did not fear them. The Corethians, for the first time, felt the strength of their new alliance. Their spirits lifted by the warriors who had come to their aid, but the Dark Eye were relentless. Commander Rorak, watching from the flagship Dreadfire, was furious. His forces were being pushed back, and he knew that if he didn't act quickly, his fleet would be destroyed. "We can't let them win," Rorak snarled, slamming his fist on the console. "Send in the reserves. All remaining ships, full speed. Ahead, this ends now." The Dark Eye fleet surged forward with renewed force, hoping to break the human and Corethian defenses. But Rachel was ready. She knew that the Dark Eye would keep coming. She had a plan to end this once and for all. Lieutenant Foster, Rachel called out, her voice firm. "Prepare the Vanguard for a final strike. Target their flagship. We end this here." "Understood." Captain Foster replied. "All ships, focus fire on the Dark Eye command ship." The Vanguard's weapons powered up, and the human fleet adjusted its formation, positioning itself for the final assault. The Dark Eye flagship Dreadfire was at the heart of their fleet, the source of their leadership. Destroying it would cripple the Dark Eye's morale and command structure, giving the humans and Corethians a decisive victory. The Vanguard fired, its plasma bolts racing toward the Dreadfire. The other human ships followed suit, their weapons firing in unison. The Dark Eye flagship was bombarded from all sides, shields flickering under the onslaught. Rorak's eyes widened as he watched the Dreadfire take hit after hit. "No, we will not fall to them," he roared. But it was too late. The Dreadfire exploded in a burst of brilliant light, sending debris flying in all directions. The loss of their flagship shattered the Dark Eye's resolve. Their fleet, once so strong and united, began to break apart. Ships retreated, abandoning the fight as they turned to flee. On the vanguard, Rachel stood, her face hard with determination. She had known this battle would come, and she had known how it would end. The Dark Eye had been a threat to the galaxy, but now they were no longer the unstoppable force they once were. The humans and Carithians had shown them that the battle was won. As the last of the Dark Eye forces fled into deep space, Rachel looked out the viewport, the stars stretching beyond. The Carithians had been saved. But more importantly, they had learned the true meaning of survival. The humans had taught them what it meant to stand together, to fight for each other, no matter the cost. Ambassador Tan stood beside her, a look of deep gratitude on his face. "We owe you everything, Captain. You've given us a chance to rebuild, to fight again." Rachel smiled, her gaze steady. "We fight for each other. It's what we do. It's what will always be here when you need us." The Carithians had learned that they were not alone in the galaxy. They had allies, now Deathworlders, who would never leave them behind. And together, they had won. This part focuses on the final battle, with the humans and Carithians working together to defeat the Dark Eye. The Dark Eye are forced to retreat, and the humans' decisive actions end the battle. The Carithians are saved, and the alliance between the humans and the Carithians is solidified. Let me know if you need any further changes or